Hello Mom and Dad Meet World. So this is part 2 of transitioning from the M4 Mac Mini, which I've got right here, going to the M2 Mac Mini, which is actually what is hooked up behind me and powering these two Thunderbolt displays. So with transitioning from the M4 Mac Mini, this is the 512 gigabyte base model, so 16 gigs of storage, 256 gigs that had been upgraded to 512 gigs, base model M4 Mac Mini, and we've got the two USB-C ports up front, but then on the rear we've got these three Thunderbolt 3/Thunderbolt 4 ports on the back, along with HDMI and Ethernet. So the hardest part has probably been transitioning from the ports, where we've got two USB-C/Thunderbolt 3 ports on the back, and then no ports up front, along with two USB-A ports. So what I'm running here is I'm running a CalDigit TS3 Plus, and then what I've got going into the CalDigit TS3 Plus is the OWC with the 4 terabyte P3 Plus hooked up to the 10 gigabit USB-C port on the back of that Thunderbolt dock. And then what I've also got is I've got another, I think it's a Dell dock that is hooked up via USB-C to USB-A adapter to one of the 5 gigabit per second USB-A ports on the back of that CalDigit dock. And then that CalDigit dock is hooked up directly to a Thunderbolt port on the back of the M2 Mac Mini. And then I've got these two Thunderbolt displays. I've got them daisy chained, so one is connected to the other with Thunderbolt 2, and then that Thunderbolt 2 to Thunderbolt 3/USB-C cable is also going directly to the back of that M2 Mac Mini, occupying the second and both of those Thunderbolt 3 ports on the back of that M2 Mac Mini. So this M2 Mac Mini configuration is 8 gigabytes of RAM, just the factory standard. This is the base model, and then 256 gigs of baseline storage. So what I needed to do to compensate for that storage is I needed to hook up another SSD. So I've got a 480 gigabyte PNY SSD just hooked up directly to the USB-A port on the back of the M2 Mac Mini. So that is what's helping with the storage and is allowing me to actually use the 256 gigs of storage. So I've taken our photos library and I've offloaded that from the main 256 gig internal storage to the 480 gig external storage with that PNY SSD. So that is what we needed to do to mitigate using the M4 with the 512 to the M2 with the 256 gigs of storage. All right, had to come back to this video right here. So let us talk about performance. So with the M4 and the M2 Mac Mini, we have Apple Intelligence turned off. So I'm using the RAM strictly for the performance aspect. We are not using any of that RAM for the Apple Intelligence part. So in difference, we've got an M2 CPU versus an M4 CPU. The M4 CPU is going to be newer technology, that newer 3 nanometer versus the 5 nanometer from the M2. So it just overall packs a more powerful punch. So let's talk about the memory. So 8 gigabytes of RAM compared to 16 gigabytes of RAM. I would thought it was going to be more of a bigger impact, but as far as like performance goes, so let's talk about editing, a little bit of a clip here. So we've got, with the very first video we did about part 1 of the M2 Mac Mini, that 8-minute 39-second video took less than 4 minutes to export. This is exporting an Apple 4K video format on Final Cut Pro. So it was very, very good. At least I thought it was, and I'm able to scrub through that timeline with 0 issues, and I've actually got the viewer set to better quality as opposed to better performance, so I still was not lagging there. And as far as lagging goes, so when I'm talking about that, I'm also not opening up any other web browsers or anything else. This was just strictly using Final Cut Pro as the one and only sole app open. I had no issues. But where we do get into a little bit of, let's say, a bigger difference, and I know I would think that 16 gigs versus 8 gigs of RAM would be a big difference, but we talk about the the speed of the solid state drive. So with the M2 Mac Mini, it is known that if you got the base model 256 gig, Apple was using one single piece of NAND flash memory, so resulted in about 16 to 1700 or so megabytes per second read and write. You're getting about 2700 megabytes per second read and write with the M4, no matter if you got the 256 or the 512. So that is significantly slower. However, when I'm talking about working off of that OWC 4 terabyte P3 Plus NVMe SSD, we got 21 to 2600 megabytes per second using Blackmagic speed test with the M4 Mac Mini hooked up directly to that USB 4 port on the back. So with this configuration, remember, because it doesn't have as many ports, I'm taking that OWC drive, plugging it directly into that CalDigit 10 gigabit per second USB-C port on the back, but I'm only getting between 5 to 600 megabytes per second read and write speed. But here is the thing. I know those numbers are tremendously different, whether it be the factory SSD 256 compared to the 512 gig on the M4 Mac Mini, but the actual real world use is, again, I'm working off of Final Cut with that 8-minute and 39-second video and then scrubbing and then exporting. I got zero issues. Again, no lag. I put it on better quality as opposed to better performance, and I still got export time less than half of real time. So again, 8-minute 39 seconds, 3 minutes and 57 seconds to export. No issues. That's actually really good in my opinion. The numbers tell you different, but the real world, real life experience, it was absolutely just fine. So that is why I am telling you that yes, I am 100% making the switch from the base model M4 Mac Mini. Base model I say because it's got the factory CPU, GPU, 16 gigs of memory. I just upgraded the SSD from 256 to 512, but that is going back to Apple, and I am actually sticking with the M2 Mac Mini here. Yes, that is 8 gigs of RAM, 256 gigs of storage. So I do have to add, in case you don't have as many storage needs, you absolutely do not need to add another SSD. You don't need to move your photos library to an external SSD. If you can get away with storage, I will tell you that in everyday, day-to-day use, whether you are using it for web browsing, email, paying bills, using Microsoft Office, Slack, anything day-to-day, I would say, you will be absolutely just fine, and you will be happy with the performance of the M2 Mac Mini. So I really appreciated the M4 Mac Mini, but coming from the M4 now back to the M2 Mac Mini, I appreciate it quite a bit more. It is still a powerhouse and a beast. Even though the numbers don't reflect it, it still is, in day-to-day real world use, a very good machine. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. $200 M2 Mac Mini, that is now our daily driver and our desktop. So if you liked it, you know what to do. Like, share, comment, subscribe. It all helps out our channel. And until next time, thanks for watching. Bye for now.